the most luxurious gala in New York, 300 members of the high society elite, and a powerful businessman who believes he has deceived his wife perfectly. But she discovered everything 6 months ago, and tonight, she hasn't come just to dance. What happened on that stage was so devastating, so perfectly calculated, that it became a legend in Manhattan's high society. This is the true story of how a woman transformed her greatest humiliation into the most elegant revenge ever seen. Richard Miller adjusted his bow tie for the third time in front of the Venetian mirror in his office. The reflection looking back was that of a 50-year-old man at the peak of success. Graying hair, perfectly styled, an impeccable Italian suit, and a smile that had already won dozens of million-dollar contracts. But today, something different sparkled in his brown eyes, an anxiety he rarely allowed to be noticed. The Hope Foundation Gala was the social event of the year in New York City. Businessmen, politicians, celebrities, and the elite would gather at the luxurious Pierre Hotel. Richard had sponsored the event for the last 5 years, always accompanied by Elena, his wife of 22 years. But this year would be different. His fingers delicately touched the gold invitation on the mahogany desk. 2 invitations, actually. One addressed to Mr. Richard Miller and Mrs. Elena Miller. The other simply to Mr. Richard Miller and guest. The second had arrived discreetly through his private secretary, with a handwritten note that only said, "So we can make our union official before society. With love, Isabella." Isabella Carvalho. The name resonated in his mind like a seductive melody. At 32, she was everything Elena had ceased to be. Vibrant, passionate, full of dreams and ambitions. Marketing director for one of his competitors, she had entered his life 6 months ago during a business conference in Chicago. What began as a professional attraction quickly transformed into something much more dangerous and overwhelming. Richard remembered that first encounter perfectly. Isabella had aggressively questioned his strategies during a lecture, forcing him to defend his views with a passion he hadn't felt in years. After the event, she approached to apologize, but in her green eyes, he didn't see regret, but defiance. They dined together that night, and Richard discovered it had been decades since he had talked to someone who truly stimulated him intellectually. Elena, on the other hand, had settled into the role of a high society wife. Her days were reduced to charity luncheons, spa sessions, and supervising the renovation of their country house in the Hamptons. Her conversations revolved around social gossip and complaints about the staff. The love they once felt had transformed into a cordial domestic coexistence, interrupted only by discussions about investments and social commitments. The phone rang, interrupting his reflections. It was Isabella. "My love," her voice had that velvety quality that always made him forget where he was. "Are you ready for our big night?" "Isabella, we need to talk about this." Richard hesitated, looking at the framed photo on his desk, where Elena smiled at his side during a trip to Paris the previous year. "I'm not sure it's the right time to..." "Richard." She interrupted him softly, but firmly. "We talked about this yesterday, and last week, and last month. You said you were tired of living a lie, that you wanted to take our relationship public. You were the one who suggested I accompany you to the ball." It was true. During a moment of passion in her apartment, after a particularly sharp argument with Elena about his constant absence from home, Richard had declared he was ready to leave the marriage and start a new life. Isabella had radiated with joy, talking about how they could finally be happy together without needing to hide. But now, with the ball only 2 hours away, reality knocked on his door like an unpaid bill. Elena was not just his wife. She was his silent partner, owning 40% of the company's shares. His lawyers had already made it clear that a divorce could be financially catastrophic. Furthermore, Elena came from one of the most traditional families in New York, the Silveras, whose political and social influence had opened many doors for his business over the years. "Are you picking me up at 8? Isabella's voice brought him back to the present. "Of course," he replied, his voice sounding more confident than he felt. "Use the blue dress we bought in Paris. You'll be stunning." After hanging up, Richard walked to the window of his office on the 22nd floor. The city of New York stretched out before him, a sea of lights beginning to flicker with the approach of night. Somewhere down there, Elena was getting ready in her suite, where she had spent the afternoon at one of the city's most expensive spas. She had mentioned during breakfast that she would wear the Valentino dress they had bought in Rome. His mind flew back to 3 hours ago, when Elena had called him to confirm if he would pick her up at 7:30. Her voice sounded strange on the phone, colder than usual, but he had attributed it to the stress of preparations. Elena always got nervous before major social events, worried about making the right impression. What she didn't know, or at least he hoped she didn't know, was that during the last 6 months, Richard had built an elaborate web of lies to keep his relationship with Isabella a secret. Invented business trips, fake meetings, even a reserved office where they could meet discreetly. Everything carefully planned so that his two lives would not cross. Until tonight. Richard looked again at the 2 invitations. A decision needed to be made. He could continue living the lie, accompany Elena to the ball as the exemplary husband the whole New York society knew, and meet secretly with Isabella at another time. Or he could finally have the courage to embrace his true feelings, even if it cost him everything he had built. His cell phone vibrated with a message from Isabella. "I can't wait to dance with you in front of everyone. It will be our first dance as a real couple." Then, almost immediately, a message from Elena arrived. "Darling, I changed my mind about the dress. I'm going to wear the gold one you said was your favorite. I want to be perfect for you tonight." Richard felt a cold sweat run down his back. Elena never showed that kind of attention to his desires regarding clothes. In fact, she rarely asked his opinion on anything related to her appearance. Something was different, but he couldn't identify what. His reflections were interrupted by the arrival of his chauffeur, Charles, who knocked discreetly on the door. "Mr. Miller, the car is ready. Where are we going first?" The question resonated in the office like an ultimatum. Richard looked for the last time at Elena's photo, then at his phone, where Isabella's message still glowed on the screen. Finally, his eyes rested on a third photo he kept in a locked drawer. A photo of Isabella smiling during a weekend they had spent together in the Hamptons, while Elena was visiting her mother in Palm Beach. "Charles," he finally said, his voice firm but loaded with consequences. "We are going to pick up Ms. Isabella first, then we proceed to the ball." The chauffeur nodded and withdrew. Richard remained alone for a few more minutes, knowing he was about to cross a line from which he might not be able to return. But for the first time in months, he felt truly alive. He had no idea that Elena had discovered Isabella 3 weeks ago, thanks to a private investigator hired to confirm her suspicions. Nor did he know that his wife had spent the last few days meticulously planning her own strategy for the night of the ball. And certainly, he did not imagine that at that exact moment, Elena was in her own car, following a carefully calculated route that would guarantee she reached the ball just a few minutes after him and his guest. The game had begun, and all the players were positioning themselves on the board. The public revelation. Do you think a betrayal like this can be forgiven? Comment your opinion. The main ballroom of the Pierre Hotel had never looked so dazzling. Austrian crystal chandeliers hung from the ornate ceiling, casting golden reflections over tables covered with French silk cloths. More than 300 guests circulated through the room, a parade of designer dresses and impeccable tuxedos. As a chamber orchestra played classic waltzes, Richard adjusted his shirt cuff for the 10th time in 5 minutes. Beside him, Isabella radiated elegance in a petrol blue dress that hugged her curves sublimely. The neckline was discreet, but bold enough to attract admiring glances. Her brown hair was gathered in a sophisticated bun, highlighting the diamond necklace he had given her the previous month. "You're nervous," she observed, gently touching his arm. "Relax, love. This is our night." Richard forced a smile. Since they had arrived 20 minutes ago, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being observed with more attention than normal. Several acquaintances had approached to greet them, and although they maintained the usual cordiality, Richard perceived a speculative glint in their eyes. Elena's absence was being noticed. "Mr. Miller," the shrill voice of Martha Silvera, one of the event organizers, and a distant cousin of Elena, cut through the air. She approached with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "What a surprise to see you here with such a young and charming guest." "Martha," Richard responded with practiced diplomacy, "I'd like you to meet Isabella Carvalho, marketing director at Carvalho and Associates. Isabella, this is Martha Silvera, one of the pillars of our charity society. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Silvera." Isabella extended her hand gracefully, but Richard noticed the almost imperceptible tension in her voice. "The pleasure is mine, dear." Martha shook the offered hand, her eyes examining Isabella from head to toe. "And Elena? Isn't she coming tonight?" "What a pity. She adores this event. In fact, she was the one who suggested this year's theme." "Elena is indisposed." Richard lied with ease, a skill he had perfected in recent months. "A terrible cold. She insisted I come anyway, since we are the main sponsors." "Oh, what a shame truly," Martha murmured, but her tone suggested anything except pity. "Well, I hope she recovers soon. We'll give her your regards, of course." After Martha moved away, Isabella turned to Richard with a worried expression. "She knows," she said in a low voice, "from the way she looked at me. Richard, I have the impression that everyone here knows." "You're imagining things," he responded, but his own confidence was wavering. "Let's dance. That will help you relax." The dance floor was moderately full, couples spinning in an elegant waltz. Richard led Isabella to the center, and she surrendered to the music with a natural grace that made several couples stop to admire them. For a moment, Richard allowed himself to forget his worries and simply enjoy the feeling of having Isabella in his arms publicly. That's when he saw her. Elena was standing at the main entrance of the ballroom, talking to the maitre d'. She wore a gold dress that Richard didn't recognize. Not the Valentino she had mentioned, but something new, bolder, which highlighted her still slender figure at 48. Her blonde hair was loose, falling in soft waves over her shoulders. And she was wearing the family jewels, the diamond tiara that had belonged to the Silvera women for 3 generations. But what most caught Richard's attention was her posture. Elena didn't look like the betrayed and humiliated wife he had imagined. On the contrary, she radiated an almost royal confidence, as if she were the true hostess of the event. "What's wrong?" Isabella asked, feeling him stiffen during the dance. "Nothing," he murmured, trying to keep Elena in his field of vision without being obvious. "Keep dancing." Elena finished her conversation with the maitre d' and began walking through the room. She was not alone. A tall man with gray hair and an impeccable tuxedo accompanied her. Richard recognized him instantly. Dr. Alexander Montenegro, one of the city's most respected lawyers, and, coincidentally, an expert in corporate law. Richard's stomach tightened. Why would Elena be accompanied by Montenegro? And why did she look so triumphant? The music came to an end, and Richard led Isabella off the floor. He needed fresh air to think clearly, but before they could head to the terrace, Elena appeared before them like a golden apparition. "Richard, darling," her voice sounded melodious, almost cheerful. "What a surprise to find you here." The anger Richard felt was like a punch to the stomach. There was his wife, elegant and smiling, while he was accompanied by his mistress in front of 300 people from Manhattan's high society. "Elena," he managed to stammer. "I thought you said you were sick." "Ah, yes," she laughed, a crystalline sound that attracted the attention of several nearby people. "Fortunately, I recovered in time. I couldn't miss the ball, especially not tonight." She turned toward Isabella with a radiant smile. "And you must be Isabella Carvalho. I've heard so much about you." Isabella turned visibly pale. "Mrs. Miller, Please call me Elena," she interrupted kindly. "After all, we are practically intimate, aren't we? Richard tells me everything about your business meetings." The double meaning was unmistakable, but said with such elegance that no one else besides the three of them could have noticed. Richard felt a cold sweat run down his back. "Elena, we can talk in private," he whispered urgently. "Later, darling. Now it wouldn't be appropriate to abandon our guest." She addressed Isabella again. "You look beautiful, dear. This dress is a unique piece, isn't it? I recognize the work of Madame Dubois. Richard has impeccable taste for gifts." Isabella unconsciously touched the diamond necklace on her neck, and Richard realized with horror that Elena had noticed the gesture. "Ah, and this necklace," Elena continued, her voice still sweet as honey. "It's absolutely dazzling. It must have cost quite a bit." Richard was always generous with his special collaborators. At that moment, Dr. Montenegro approached the group. "Elena, dear, excuse the interruption." He offered a cordial smile to Richard and Isabella. "Richard, a pleasure to see you. And you must be Ms. Carvalho, of whom we've heard so much." "Heard so much?" Richard repeated, his voice sounding strange even to him. "Oh yes," Montenegro smiled. "Elena told me about the innovations you are implementing in the company. Very interesting, I must say." Richard looked from Montenegro to Elena, trying to decipher what was happening. His wife maintained a serene, almost innocent expression, but he knew that glint in her eyes. It was the same glint she had when she secured a winning bid at an art auction. "Well," Elena announced suddenly, "I think it's time we do what we came to do." "What you came to do?" Isabella asked, her voice barely a whisper. Elena smiled, and for the first time that night, Richard saw a flash of the woman who had married him 22 years ago. Determined, intelligent, and completely relentless when necessary, because we didn't discover it together. Elena gave a discreet signal to the maitre d', who immediately headed to the stage where the orchestra was. The sound of instruments gradually ceased, and all conversations in the room lowered in volume. The maitre d' delicately tapped a crystal glass, calling for general attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice resonated through the sound system, "we have the pleasure of inviting Mrs. Elena Silvera Miller to the stage for a few special words." Richard's blood ran cold. Elena never gave speeches at social events. She always left that part to him or other organizers. "With your permission," Elena said sweetly, touching Richard's arm. "Duty calls." She walked toward the stage with the grace of a queen, leaving Richard, Isabella, and Montenegro in a tension-filled silence. Around them, the guests positioned themselves to have a better view of the stage. On the stage, Elena delicately adjusted the microphone and smiled at the audience. The spotlight made her diamond tiara shine like stars. "Good evening, friends." Her voice sounded clear and confident. "First of all, I would like to thank all of you for being here today, contributing to such a noble cause as the Hope Foundation." Polite applause resonated through the room. "As many of you know," Elena continued, "my family has a long tradition of philanthropy in this city, and tonight I would like to announce a new chapter in that tradition." Richard felt his legs tremble. Whatever Elena was planning, he was sure it wouldn't be good for him. "Starting today," Elena announced, her voice gaining strength, "I will personally assume the presidency of the Hope Foundation. And to fund our new projects, I will have the pleasure of making the largest individual donation in the Foundation's history." Murmurs of admiration spread through the audience. $50 million, Elena declared, and the room exploded in enthusiastic applause. Richard felt as if he had been struck by lightning. $50 million was practically the entire joint account he and Elena maintained for personal investments. How could she have access to that amount without his signature? "And now," Elena continued, when the applause died down, "I would like to invite a very special person to join me on stage, a person who has been fundamental in certain recent changes in my life." Richard's heart stopped completely. "Isabella Carvalho, could you come up here, please?" The entire ballroom turned to look in the direction where Richard and Isabella were. Isabella was as pale as a ghost, her hands visibly trembling. "Go," Richard whispered urgently. "We have no other choice." With hesitant steps, Isabella walked toward the stage under the curious gaze of the entire New York elite. Richard remained where he was, feeling as if he were witnessing a car crash in slow motion. Elena extended her hand to help Isabella up onto the stage. Her smile never wavered. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "I'd like you to meet Isabella Carvalho, an extraordinary woman who changed my perspective on many things." Richard closed his eyes, preparing for the worst. Beside him, Dr. Montenegro observed the scene with professional interest. "You see," Elena continued, "Isabella taught me a very valuable lesson about the importance of honesty in relationships. And that's why tonight, I've decided to be completely honest with all of you about some major changes in my life." The room was in absolute silence, every person hanging on every word. "After 22 years of marriage," Elena announced with a clear and firm voice, "I am divorcing my husband, Richard Miller." The impact was immediate. Murmurs of shock resonated through the room, and several people turned to look directly at Richard. He felt as if the ground had disappeared from under his feet. But Elena was not finished. "And also tonight," she continued, "I would like to announce that, as part of the divorce settlement already filed, I will be assuming total control of Miller and Associates as I own, through my family holding company, 60 of the company's shares." Richard's world collapsed completely. 60? That was impossible. He owned 50, Elena 40%, and employees owned the remaining 40 through a profit-sharing program. "As some of you might not know," Elena explained calmly, "in the last 6 months, I discreetly acquired the employees' shares, in addition to an extra package that my husband had, inadvertently, put up as collateral for some undeclared personal loans." Richard remembered with horror the loans he had taken out to maintain his secret apartment and fund his expensive gifts for Isabella. Loans he had guaranteed with his own company shares, thinking he could pay them back quickly. "But don't worry," Elena smiled radiantly at the shocked audience. "The company will continue to operate normally under new management, and I'm sure everyone will understand that this was a very difficult decision, but necessary for my emotional well-being." She turned toward Isabella, who stood beside her like a marble statue. "And now, Isabella, I'd like you to say a few words to our guests. After all, you played such an important role in this revelation." The silence in the room was deafening. 300 members of Manhattan's high society seemed to have forgotten how to breathe, their eyes fixed on the drama unfolding on stage. Isabella was motionless, as if she had turned to stone, while Elena maintained her serene smile, waiting for a response. Isabella began, her voice barely leaving her throat. The microphone caught the fragile sound and amplified it for the whole room. "I don't know what to say." "Oh dear," Elena responded with a venomous sweetness. "I'm sure you'll find the right words. After all, you were always very eloquent in your private messages." Richard felt the blood drain completely from his face. Private messages. Elena knew about the messages. He looked around desperately seeking an exit, but he was surrounded by familiar faces looking at him with a mix of shock, morbid curiosity, and ill-disguised pleasure at someone else's misfortune. "Elena, no!" Richard's voice resonated through the room, louder than he intended. All gazes turned toward him, and he felt as if he were naked before the crowd. "Ah, Richard," Elena waved cheerfully in his direction. "How good of you to speak up. Why don't you come up here too? After all, this is a family moment." The last thing Richard wanted was to go up on that stage, but the social pressure was overwhelming. Hundreds of eyes were observing him, waiting for his next action. With steps that felt stuck in mud, he walked toward the stage. When he reached Elena and Isabella's side, he could see his wife's complete transformation up close. The woman he had known for more than 2 decades had disappeared, replaced by someone cold, calculating, and absolutely relentless. "Perfect," Elena murmured to him before addressing the audience again. "Now we have all the main characters gathered for the finale of our little play." She turned her attention to the phone. "Let's see. Here is a particularly interesting message sent last week. My love, I can't wait to get rid of this farce of a marriage. Elena is just an obstacle between us and our happiness. Soon we will be free to live our love openly." The ballroom erupted in muffled whispers. Richard closed his eyes, wishing the earth would open and swallow him. "And here," Elena continued mercilessly, "we have an equally moving response from Ms. Carvalho. Richard, you are the man of my dreams. I can't stand having to hide anymore. When you finally get rid of that cold and calculating woman, we can be truly happy." Isabella let out an audible sob. Tears began to run down her face, smearing her carefully applied makeup. "Cold and calculating woman," Elena repeated, savoring every word. An interesting description, considering that this cold and calculating woman was the one who built half the business empire that you two were so eager to enjoy. Dr. Montenegro, who had remained discreetly at the foot of the stage, chose this moment to speak up. "Ladies and gentlemen," his professional voice cut through the tension, "I apologize for the interruption, but perhaps it is appropriate to clarify some legal aspects of the situation." Elena nodded gracefully. "Please, doctor, I think our guests would be interested in knowing the technical details." Montenegro climbed onto the stage and stood beside the microphone. "As lawyer for Mrs. Elena Miller, I can confirm that all legal procedures were duly filed this afternoon in the provincial court. The divorce petition includes the division of assets according to the partial community property regime, in addition to the dissolution of the business partnership." He paused, allowing the information to be absorbed by the audience. "Furthermore," he continued, "due to certain tax irregularities discovered in Mr. Miller's personal accounts, including undeclared loans and the improper use of company resources for personal purposes, the IRS will be notified on Monday for a full audit." Richard's world crumbled completely. Tax irregularities? Company resources? He had been extremely careful to keep his extramarital activities separate from the company's finances. Or at least, he thought he had been. "Dr. Montenegro," Richard managed to say, his voice coming out as a croak, "may I know specifically what irregularities you are referring to?" Montenegro smiled coldly. "Of course, Mr. Miller. I am referring to the $200,000 transferred from the company account to fund the apartment on Fifth Avenue, registered in the name of a shell company. Also, the undeclared expenses for jewelry, trips, and other gifts acquired with corporate cards for clearly personal purposes." Richard felt his legs weaken. How had Elena discovered the apartment? He had been meticulous in hiding that property, using an offshore company he had created years ago for other investments. Additionally, Montenegro continued, inexorably, there is the matter of fraudulent contracts with the firm Carvalho and Associates, where fictitious consulting services were invoiced to justify the transfer of resources to personal accounts. Isabella turned even paler, if that were possible. "What contracts?" she whispered. "Oh dear," Elena addressed her with fake compassion. "Didn't you know? Your beloved Richard created fake contracts between his company and yours to justify the payment of over $500,000 in the last 6 months. Money that, coincidentally, was used to fund the luxurious lifestyle you two enjoyed." "That's a lie," Richard exploded, finally finding his voice. "Those contracts were legitimate. Isabella provided real consulting services." "Ah, yes," Elena laughed, a sound that chilled everyone's blood in the room. "Consulting services? Is that what they call it now?" She turned back to the phone and began to scroll the screen. "How interesting. Here is a message from you, Richard. My love, the $50,000 consulting contract was approved. Now we can take that trip to Paris you wanted." And the response from Ms. Carvalho. "Richard, you are perfect. I can't wait to celebrate in our special apartment." Richard's anger transformed into panic. If Elena had intercepted his messages, she knew everything. Every meeting, every intimate moment he had shared with Isabella. "How?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "How did you find out?" Elena smiled, and for the first time that night, her smile seemed genuine. "Oh, Richard, did you really believe I was the wealthy and clueless wife I pretended to be? I knew something was wrong months ago. Your constant absences, your increasingly elaborate lies, the inexplicable expenses." She walked around him like a predator circling its prey. "So I hired a private investigator, and what interesting discoveries he made, not only about your relationship with Ms. Carvalho, but also about your creative interpretations of tax law." Richard looked desperately at Isabella, seeking some kind of support or solidarity. But she was clearly in shock. Tears ran freely down her face. "Elena," he tried one last strategy. "We can resolve this in private. There's no need to involve all these people." "All these people?" Elena looked around the ballroom, as if only now remembering the audience. "Oh, but Richard, these people are our family, our friends, our business partners. They have the right to know what kind of man you really are." Dr. Montenegro cleared his throat discreetly. "Mrs. Elena, perhaps it's appropriate to mention the amicable separation agreement we offered Mr. Miller." "Ah, yes," Elena nodded. "How forgetful of me. Richard, even after all these unpleasant revelations, I am still willing to be generous." She turned toward him, her expression becoming almost maternal. "You can keep 10% of the company, enough for a comfortable retirement. You can also keep the beach house and the apartment where you were, consulting with Ms. Carvalho." "And in exchange?" Richard asked, though he already feared the answer. "In exchange," Elena responded softly, "you will sign a full confession regarding the tax irregularities, assuming total responsibility. You will also agree never again to get involved in the Silvera family businesses or attempt to contact any member of our family. And if I refuse," Elena's smile turned glacial, "then, my dear, you will spend the next 5 to 10 years explaining your creative actions to the IRS and the district attorney, and Ms. Carvalho will have to explain her participation in the fraudulent contracts." Isabella sobbed audibly. "I didn't know," she said, her voice breaking. "I swear I didn't know the contracts were fake." "Oh dear." Elena addressed her with compassion that seemed almost sincere. "I believe you. That's why I'm offering you a chance to redeem yourself." "What chance?" Isabella asked, clinging to any hope. "You can testify regarding Richard's involvement in the creation of the fraudulent contracts. In exchange, your company will receive total immunity, and you can continue your career without major issues." "No!" Richard exploded. "Isabella, don't listen to her. We can fight this together." Isabella looked from Richard to Elena, and then to the crowd of faces observing them. Finally, her eyes rested on Dr. Montenegro. "If I testify," she asked hesitantly, "what will happen to Richard?" "That will depend on him," Montenegro responded diplomatically. "If he accepts the agreement, the consequences will be minimized. If he decides to fight, He left the sentence hanging, but the implication was clear. Elena returned to the microphone, addressing the audience once more. "Friends," her voice returned to a cheerful and confident tone. "I know tonight has brought some unexpected revelations, but I want you to know that life goes on, and it goes on very positively." She paused, allowing suspense to build. "I'd like to announce that starting next week, Miller & Associates will be renamed Silvera Holdings, returning to its family roots. I am very excited to work with all of you in building an even more prosperous future." Hesitant applause began to resonate through the ballroom. The New York elite were clearly divided between shock and admiration for the masterful way Elena had orchestrated the whole situation. "And now," Elena announced, "I believe our special guests would like to withdraw to discuss the details of the proposed agreements." It was a polite but unmistakable dismissal. Richard looked for the last time at the crowd of familiar faces, knowing his life, as he knew it, had ended that night. Some looked at him with pity, others with curiosity, but most simply seemed relieved not to be in his place. "Let's go," he said to Isabella, offering her his arm. It was the least he could do after dragging her into this catastrophe. When they stepped off the stage, Dr. Montenegro followed them discreetly. "There is a private room reserved for our conversation," he informed them. "I suggest we take advantage of the rest of the night to resolve all pending issues." As they left the main hall, Richard heard Elena take back the microphone. "And now," her voice resonated behind them, "how about we return to the celebrations? The orchestra will offer us a special waltz, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of this memorable night." The music resumed, and gradually the murmur of conversation returned to the hall. The high society of New York had witnessed one of the most spectacular scandals in its history, and could now enjoy the pleasure of analyzing it in detail over the coming months. As he walked through the gold-lined corridors of the hotel, Richard realized his life had been completely destroyed and rebuilt in the space of 30 minutes. And the architect of his ruin was back on stage, dancing gracefully with the guests, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Elena Silvera Miller had played the final move, and she had won absolutely. The consequences and the final victory. Follow our story to see if Elena really found happiness after her revenge. The private room at the Pierre Hotel was decorated with the same discreet luxury that characterized the entire establishment. Italian leather armchairs surrounded a polished mahogany table, where Dr. Montenegro had carefully organized a stack of legal documents. A coffee and scotch service waited on a side table, though no one showed an appetite for anything. Richard was sunken into one of the armchairs, still trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. Beside him, Isabella cried silently, her petrol blue dress now stained by the tears running through her makeup. Dr. Montenegro meticulously organized the papers, occasionally consulting his tablet. "Well," Montenegro began, his professional voice cutting through the heavy silence, "I suggest we review the terms of the proposed agreement before any decision is made." "Agreed?" Richard exploded, finally finding his voice. "This isn't an agreement. It's a robbery. Elena orchestrated all this. She set a trap for me." Montenegro looked at him with the patience of someone accustomed to dealing with clients in denial. "Mr. Miller, with all respect, your wife simply used information you provided yourself through your actions. The fraudulent contracts, the undeclared loans, the improper use of corporate resources, all of that is documented." He opened a folder and spread several photographs on the table. Richard recognized the images instantly. He and Isabella entering the apartment on Fifth Avenue, dining at expensive restaurants, shopping at luxury boutiques. "Her private investigator was very thorough," Montenegro continued. 3 months of surveillance produced more than enough evidence to support all the accusations. 3 months? Isabella raised her head, her makeup smeared. giving her a ghostly appearance. She knew 3 months ago. In fact, Montenegro consulted his notes. Elena's first suspicions arose about 5 months ago, when she noticed discrepancies in the business accounts. The formal investigation began 3 months ago. Richard felt a new wave of nausea. 5 months? But that means, Montenegro confirmed, that she knew about your relationship practically from the beginning. And during all that time, she was patiently collecting evidence and planning her legal strategy. My God, Isabella whispered. All those family dinners, those cordial conversations when we met at events. She was faking the whole time. Not exactly faking. A new voice resonated from the room's entrance. Elena appeared in the doorway, still radiant in her gold dress, but now without the diamond tiara. I was observing, studying, learning. She entered the room with the confidence of someone holding all the cards. Elena. Richard stood up, a last spark of his old authority shining in his eyes. We need to talk alone. We no longer have anything to talk about alone, Richard, she responded coldly, settling elegantly into the armchair opposite him. 22 years of marriage ended the moment you decided I was just an obstacle to your happiness. Did you hear the whole conversation? Isabella said. It wasn't a question, but a shocked realization. Elena smiled, and for the first time that night seemed genuinely amused. Dear, I didn't just hear the conversations. I have audio recordings, photographs, bank statements, credit card records, and even some very intimate text messages. She gestured to Montenegro, who opened a second folder, everything meticulously cataloged and authenticated. Elena continued. Enough to support not only the divorce, but also criminal charges of embezzlement and tax fraud. Criminal. Richard paled. Elena, you can't be serious. Oh, but I am completely serious, she responded, her voice acquiring a coldness he had never heard before. You stole money from our company, Richard. You created fake contracts. You used corporate resources to fund your extramarital life. And on top of that, you declared personal expenses as business expenses to lower taxes. She leaned forward, her eyes fixed on his. In other words, you weren't just an unfaithful husband. You were a criminal. Montenegro cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps it's appropriate to review the options available to Mr. Miller. Please, Elena gestured gracefully. After all, I am still a reasonable woman. Montenegro organized the documents before him. Option 1. Mr. Miller accepts the proposed divorce settlement. He confesses to the tax irregularities and agrees to testify about the methods used to hide the diverted resources. In exchange, he will receive 10% of the company, plus the mentioned properties, and avoid any criminal proceedings. And option 2? Richard asked, though he already feared the answer. Option 2. Mr. Miller rejects the agreement. In that case, all evidence will be sent to the IRS and the district attorney. The divorce will be contentious, likely resulting in the total loss of all marital assets. And there is a significant probability of prison. And me? Isabella asked with a trembling voice. Elena turned toward her, and for a moment, her expression softened slightly. As for you, dear, I recognize you were more a victim of Richard's manipulations than a conscious conspirator. Manipulations, Richard exploded. Isabella knew exactly what she was doing. Did she? Elena arched an eyebrow. Ms. Carvalho, did you know Richard was married when you started the relationship? Yes, I knew, Isabella admitted hesitantly. And did you know he was using company resources to fund your encounters? No. Isabella shook her head vigorously. He said the money came from personal investments and the consulting contracts your company signed with Miller and Associates. He said they were legitimate, that there was real consulting work to be performed. Elena felt as if her suspicions had been confirmed. Exactly what I thought. Richard, not only did you deceive me, you also deceived this poor girl. Poor girl. Richard laughed bitterly. Elena, she knew I was married. She participated actively in the relationship. Participated in an extramarital relationship? Yes, Elena agreed. But she did not consciously participate in tax crimes. There is a significant difference. Montenegro consulted his documents again. The proposal for Ms. Carvalho is as follows. In exchange for her testimony on how Richard presented the consulting contracts to her, her company will receive total immunity from any investigation. Furthermore, Silvera Holdings will be willing to consider legitimate consulting contracts in the future. Isabella looked from Montenegro to Elena, then to Richard. And if I refuse? Then, Elena responded softly, you will be considered a co-conspirator in the tax crimes. Your company will be investigated, and you will likely face criminal charges. The silence in the room was deafening. Richard could hear the distant sound of music coming from the ballroom, where the party continued as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Elena, he said finally, his voice loaded with defeat. Why are you doing this? You could have just asked for a divorce. Elena studied him for a long moment before responding. Richard, for the last 22 years, I dedicated my life to building something with you. Not just a marriage, but a business empire, a reputation, a position in society. She stood up and walked to the window, looking at the city lights. And then I discovered that, while I was doing that, you were systematically destroying everything we built. Not only betraying me emotionally, but literally stealing the money I helped earn to impress your young mistress. She turned back toward him, and Richard saw tears glistening in her eyes for the first time that night. You turned our marriage into a lie, our company into a source of resources for your extramarital relationship, and on top of that, you turned me into a joke for the entire New York society. Elena, You what? She interrupted. Do you regret it? You didn't know what you were doing? It was just a mistake? She shook her head sadly. Richard, you meticulously planned every lie, every diversion of money, every secret encounter, and all that time you would come home and pretend to be a loving husband. I still love you, he said desperately. Elena laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Love? Richard, you didn't even respect me enough to be honest with me. How can you talk about love? She returned to her armchair and sat with elegance. No, my dear. What you felt for me was convenience. I was useful for your career, for your social position, for your financial stability. But when you found something more exciting, you didn't hesitate to discard me. That's not true, Richard protested, but his words sounded weak even to him. Isn't it? Elena opened her purse and took out the phone again. Here is a message you sent to Isabella last week. I can't wait to get rid of Elena definitely. She is like a dead weight in my life. The silence that followed was absolute. Isabella looked at Richard with a growing horror, as if seeing him for the first time. Did you really write that? She whispered. Richard could find no words to respond. The message was true, written during a moment of particular frustration with Elena. But hearing the words repeated aloud made them cruel and despicable. I understand, Elena said softly, putting the phone away. I think I've made my position quite clear. Montenegro consulted his watch. I suggest you make a decision tonight. The agreements need to be signed at the latest by tomorrow at noon for the proposed terms to hold. And if we need more time to think? Isabella asked. Then, Elena responded softly, the terms will become progressively less favorable. As of tomorrow at noon, the offer of immunity for Ms. Carvalho will be withdrawn. On Monday, the offer of an agreement for Richard will also be withdrawn. You want to force us to decide under pressure, Richard accused her. No, Elena corrected calmly. I am offering you the opportunity to minimize the consequences of your actions. But my patience and my generosity have limits. She stood up again, smoothing her gold dress. I will give you 30 minutes to discuss among yourselves. Dr. Montenegro will stay here to clarify any doubts regarding the legal aspects. Walking toward the door, she stopped and turned one last time. Oh, and Richard, regardless of your decision tonight, our marriage is over. The only question is whether you prefer to come out of this situation as a man who at least tried to do the right thing in the end, or as a criminal who tried to fight against incontestable evidence. She left the room, leaving behind the soft sound of her dress whispering on the marble floor. Richard sank back into the armchair, finally understanding the full magnitude of his situation. Elena had not only discovered his betrayal, she had transformed that discovery into a masterpiece of calculated revenge. And now, he and Isabella had 30 minutes to decide how they wanted their lives to be destroyed. The legacy of triumph, share your opinion. If you think this is the perfect revenge. 6 months after the Gala ball that became a legend among New York high society, the office on the 22nd floor had a new occupant. Elena Silvera was sitting behind the same mahogany desk that once belonged to Richard. But the environment had been completely transformed. The walls now displayed contemporary American art. In place of the masculine corporate trophies were large arrangements of fresh flowers, bringing life and color to the space. She was reviewing the quarterly reports for the now renamed Silvera Holdings, satisfied with the numbers she saw. The company had not only recovered from the scandal, but was thriving under her new direction. The transition had been surprisingly smooth, mainly because most clients and business partners had long considered her the true force behind the company's success. A soft knock on the door interrupted her reflections. Marcia, her new executive assistant, entered with a slightly worried expression. Mrs. Silvera, there is a person here who wishes to speak with you. She said she doesn't have an appointment, but that it's important. Who is it? Isabella Carvalho. Elena raised her eyes from the documents, genuinely surprised. In the 6 months since the night of the ball, she had had minimal contact with Isabella, mainly through lawyers during the legal proceedings that followed. Let her in, Elena decided. Curious about what could have brought her ex-husband's former mistress there, Isabella entered the office with visible hesitation. She was visibly thinner, her hair cut in a more conservative style, and she wore a simple business suit that contrasted drastically with the bold elegance Elena remembered from the night of the ball. Elena, she began. Then she corrected herself. Mrs. Silvera, thank you for seeing me. Please sit down. Elena gestured toward one of the armchairs in front of her desk. Can I offer you coffee? Water? Coffee would be great, thank you. Elena made the order to Marcia, who withdrew discreetly. An awkward silence established itself between the two women until the coffee arrived. Well, Elena said finally, I imagine you didn't come here just for a social visit. Isabella took a deep breath, as if preparing for something difficult. I came to thank you, she said, her words coming out quickly. I know it might sound strange, but I need to thank you for what you did that night. Elena arched an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. Thank me? Isabella, I practically destroyed your reputation in public and forced you to testify against Richard. You saved me, Isabella corrected, her words gaining strength. In the last 6 months, I've had time to understand what really happened. Richard was not just cheating on me. He was manipulating me, using me, and I was too young and stupid to realize. She paused to take a sip of coffee, her hands trembling slightly. When I started really analyzing our relationship, I realized how many lies he had told me, not just about you, but about everything. The consulting contracts I thought were legitimate. The expensive gifts he said came from his personal investments. Even the things he told me about his feelings. Isabella looked directly at Elena for the first time since she had entered. After everything ended, I found old messages from him on my phone. Messages I had forgotten. In one of them, he said you were just a phase he needed to get over, that he had never really loved you. In another, He talked about how easy it was to manipulate emotional women like me. Elena felt a pang of something that could have been pity. No, she continued with determination. I need to say this. During the 6 months our relationship lasted, I thought I was living a great love story. I thought Richard had found in me something he couldn't find in you. But the truth is he was simply bored, and I was convenient. She stood up and walked toward the window, looking at the city. When you revealed everything that night, I felt humiliated, betrayed, destroyed. But I also felt liberated, because I could finally see Richard for what he really was. And what was he really? Elena asked softly. A man who respected none of the women in his life, Isabella responded without hesitation. He lied to you for months, stole money from the company you built together, and used me as a fantasy to escape his responsibilities. She turned back toward Elena. You, on the other hand, when you discovered what was happening, didn't just take revenge out of rage. You protected yourself. You protected your estate, and strangely, you protected me too. How did I protect you? By offering me an out, Isabella explained. You could have destroyed me completely, included me in the criminal charges, ruined my career. Instead, you gave me the chance to tell the truth and start over. Elena studied the younger woman's face, looking for signs of manipulation or falsehood, but finding only a tired sincerity. And how is your life going now? She asked. Different. Isabella smiled for the first time since she had entered. Very different. I had to rebuild my professional reputation from scratch. Some clients abandoned me when the scandal came to light, but others respected my honesty in cooperating with the investigations. She returned to the armchair. I also started therapy. I needed to understand how I had allowed myself to be so completely deceived, and, well, I learned a lot about myself. Like what? Like how I confused excitement with love, secrets with intimacy, and expensive gifts with genuine affection. Isabella responded with brutal honesty. Richard made me feel special, but it was the specialness of being a secret, of being a conquest. It was never about loving me for who I really am. Elena nodded slowly. She recognized those feelings, though from a different perspective. And Richard? She asked. Have you heard anything from him? Isabella shook her head. He tried to contact me several times in the first few months, but I didn't respond. I heard he moved to Miami, that he's trying to start over there, but I don't know the details, and I prefer it that way. Did he sign the agreement? Elena already knew the answer, but she wanted to hear Isabella's perspective. Yes, he signed it the morning after the ball. I think he finally realized he had no real choice. Isabella hesitated. Elena, may I ask you something? Of course. Did you always know he didn't really love me? Even that night when it seemed he had chosen me to accompany him to the ball instead of you? Elena considered the question carefully before responding. Isabella, during 22 years of marriage, I learned to read Richard very well, and one thing I always knew about him is that he loved himself above all else. When I discovered the two of you, my first reaction was pain and anger. But when I began to investigate more deeply, I realized you were not a rival. You were just another object he wanted to possess. How can you be so sure? Why? Elena explained kindly. If Richard really loved you, he would have left our marriage honestly. He would have divided the assets according to the law, faced the social consequences, and built a new life with you. Instead, he tried to maintain both situations, lying to both of us. Isabella slowly felt how the pieces of a puzzle finally fit together. You're right. Even when he said he wanted a divorce, there were always excuses to postpone it. It was always not the right time, or there were complications that needed to be resolved first. Exactly. Elena stood up and walked to the window, looking at the city. Richard wanted to have the best of both worlds, the stability and social status of the marriage with me, and the excitement of the secret relationship with you. He never intended to truly choose. A comfortable silence established itself between them. Elena studied Isabella, seeing a woman who had matured significantly in the last few months. "Can I ask why you really came here today?" Elena said finally. "I know it wasn't just to say thank you." Isabella smiled, a genuine smile this time. "You know me well, even knowing me so little?" She took a deep breath. "I came to make you a business proposal." "A proposal? My company is growing, but I need a larger partner for some international projects. I researched Silvera Holdings, and you have exactly the expertise and resources I need." Elena leaned back in her chair, intrigued. "And you believe I would consider doing business with you after everything that happened?" "I believe you are a smart businesswoman," Isabella responded with growing confidence. "And I believe you recognize talent when you see it, regardless of personal circumstances." Continue. Isabella opened her briefcase and took out a carefully prepared presentation. "I am specializing my company in digital marketing for firms wanting to expand into international markets. In the last 6 months, I secured 3 major clients wanting to enter the European market, but I need a partner with experience in international trade." She handed the documents to Elena. "This would be a strictly professional partnership, with clear and transparent contracts. Nothing like the fake contracts Richard created." Elena flipped through the documents, impressed despite herself by the quality of the presentation and the solidity of the numbers presented. "Are these results real?" "Completely verifiable. I can provide references for all clients, audited financial reports, and anything else you need." Elena continued studying the numbers. The proposal was truly solid, and Silvera Holdings had been considering expanding its digital marketing division. "Isabella," she said finally, "do you realize how strange it would be for us to work together? What would people say? They would say 2 smart women overcame a difficult personal situation and found a way to create value together." Isabella responded without hesitation. "Or would they say we are professional enough to separate business from personal matters? And what if it didn't work? If we discovered we couldn't work together, then we would end the partnership professionally and go our separate ways." Isabella said simply, "But I think we have more in common than you can imagine." "How so?" "We are both women who were underestimated by Richard Miller." Isabella smiled ironically. "He thought you were just a decorative wife, and that I was just a manipulable mistress. We both proved him wrong." Elena laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. "You're right." She studied Isabella for a moment more. Then she made a decision that surprised her. "All right, I'm going to consider your proposal, but with conditions." "What conditions?" "First, any partnership will be on a smaller scale initially. A pilot project for us to test how we work together." "Agreed." "Second, detailed contracts on everything, reviewed by independent lawyers." "Absolutely." "And third," Elena seemed to hesitate for the first time, "if we are going to work together, we need to completely resolve the past between us. No hidden resentments, no unresolved discomfort." Isabella nodded seriously. "Elena, I want you to know I never hated you, even during the relationship with Richard. In fact, I always admired you. He spoke about you constantly. Your intelligence, your business acumen, your position in society. I think part of what he saw in me was a younger and less threatening version of you." "Less threatening?" "You were always his intellectual equal, capable of challenging and questioning him. I was easier to control, at least at first." Isabella smiled sadly. "Ironically, that was what made our relationship less real to him." Elena considered those words, recognizing the truth in them. "You know, Isabella, I think you're right that we have more in common than I thought. We both learned valuable lessons about valuing ourselves and about not allowing men like Richard to define our worth." "Exactly," Isabella added. Elena stood up and walked to the window, looking at the city she now saw with new eyes. Not as the wife of Richard Miller, but as Elena Silvera, successful entrepreneur in her own right. Very well, she said, turning toward Isabella. Let's try this partnership, but let's do it the right way. Thank you, Elena. I promise you won't regret it. I hope not. And Isabella? Yes? The next time a man tries to tell you that you are less capable or less valuable than you really are, remember this conversation. Remember that you are strong enough to rebuild your life, smart enough to recognize your mistakes, and brave enough to try something new. Tears sparkled in Isabella's eyes. Thank you. Elena, the same goes for you. You're not just Richard Miller's ex-wife. You're a force of nature on your own. As Isabella prepared to leave, Elena reflected on how life had taken unexpected turns. 6 months ago, at the Gala ball, she had orchestrated the public destruction of her marriage as an act of revenge. But what had emerged from the ashes of that night was something she had never anticipated. A stronger and more independent version of herself. Ah, Isabella, she called as the younger woman reached the door. Yes, I think we should have lunch together next week to discuss the partnership details, of course. Of course, Isabella smiled. But this time, I'm paying. After all, it would technically be a legitimate business expense. Elena laughed out loud, a free and genuine laugh she hadn't released in months. I accept. After Isabella left, Elena returned to her desk and looked at the framed photo she had recently placed there. A photo of her alone, taken during a recent trip to Europe she had made to explore business opportunities. In the photo, she was smiling genuinely, free and confident. There were no longer photos of Richard in her office, nor in her home. Not out of anger, but because she had discovered she didn't need his presence, not even in the form of a memory, to define herself. Her phone rang, interrupting her reflections. It was Marcia. Mrs. Elena, Dr. Montenegro on line 1 said he has good news about the final divorce process. Patch him through. Montenegro's familiar voice sounded through the phone. I am pleased to inform you that all final documents have been signed and registered. You are officially divorced and have total control of Silvera Holdings. Thank you, Dr. Montenegro. It was a pleasure working with you. And I can say I have rarely seen someone handle such a difficult situation with so much elegance and determination. After hanging up, Elena allowed herself a moment of silent satisfaction. The Richard Miller chapter of her life had been definitively closed. But unlike the bitter end she had anticipated, she felt liberated. The woman who had entered that gala ball 6 months ago was the betrayed wife of Richard Miller. The woman sitting in that office today was Elena Silvera, entrepreneur, philanthropist, and architect of her own destiny. And for the first time in decades, she couldn't wait to discover what the future would hold for her. That night, while working late reviewing proposals for new Silvera Holdings projects, Elena received a text message from an unknown number. Elena, I hope you are well. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I recognize the wrong. I did you, and that you were always better than I deserved. Richard. She looked at the message for a long moment. Then, she deleted it without responding. There was nothing more to say between them. Instead, she opened a new document on her computer and began writing a business plan for the new partnership with Isabella Carvalho. Because while the past had been about revenge and justice, the future would be about growth and possibilities. And Elena Silvera was ready to embrace them all. The new office of Silvera Holdings and Carvalho Associates occupied 2 entire floors in one of New York's most modern buildings. The partnership between Elena and Isabella had flourished beyond all expectations, becoming one of the most respected international marketing consultancies in the country. Elena was in her room when Isabella entered, with an expression of ill-disguised amusement. You're going to laugh, Isabella announced, waving a magazine in her hands. At what? Richard appears in the social column of the magazine. People. Apparently he married a 25-year-old heiress. Elena arched an eyebrow. The same pattern, then. The same pattern, Isabella agreed. But here's the interesting part. According to the magazine, the new wife has already hired a private investigator because she suspects he's having an affair. Elena shook her head, more with pity than with satisfaction. Some men never learn. No, Isabella agreed, throwing the magazine into the trash. But some women? Yes. And we are the living proof of that? Elena smiled, looking through the window at the city she had conquered, not as someone's wife, but as herself. Yes, she said simply. We are.